A Marine carried a Gerber Mark II into Vietnam in 1966. It rode on his belt through the jungle, forged in Portland, Oregon, and it never let him down. 59 years later, his grandson bought a Gerber off the shelf because the box said military grade. Same name on the blade. Almost nothing else the same. There's a specific, legal reason those two knives aren't the same knife, and it has nothing to do with quality control. Nobody at the register told him that. Start with the words on the box. Military grade sounds like a standard, something tested and certified by somebody official. Is it? There is no branch of the US military that takes a knife, runs it through a gauntlet of testing, and hands back a stamp of approval to a manufacturer. The closest real thing that exists is a document called MEL STD 810, a stress testing checklist covering heat, vibration, and drops. A company reads that checklist, decides for itself whether its product passes, and prints military grade on the box. Nobody from the Pentagon shows up to verify it. Ford ran ads calling the F-150 aluminum military grade using that exact logic. So did half the flashlight companies at your local hardware store. This isn't a Gerber problem specifically. It's an industry-wide loophole, and it's empty everywhere it appears. So don't blame Gerber for using a phrase that means nothing. Blame them for what happened to the actual knife underneath it. Gerber started in 1939 in Portland when an advertising executive named Joe Gerber mailed handmade kitchen knives to his clients as Christmas gifts, and Abercrombie and Fitch liked them enough to put them in a catalog. By the 1960s, Gerber's sons had turned a gift company into a military supplier. In 1987, a Finnish company called Fiskars bought Gerber outright. That's it. That's the whole transaction. No scandal in the purchase itself. What happened after is the part nobody puts on the label. The knife that made Gerber's name was the Mark II, released in 1966. A double-edged 6.5-inch spear point blade with a wasp waist profile, built for both piercing and slashing, a cast aluminum handle, 12 3/4 inches total, 8 ounces. Soldiers in Vietnam carried it and trusted it with their lives. By 2003, Gerber employed roughly 300 people, pulled in close to $100 million a year, and stood as the second largest multi-tool seller in the country, behind Leatherman. That's the company Fiskars bought. Here's what a piece of that same company's steel looks like today. Take a knife called the EZ out. One knife collector on a forum called Blade Forums didn't argue about it online. He tested it. He put a Rockwell hardness reader on 2 EZ outs, one built in the 1990s, one built this century, and measured the actual steel. The 90s knife came back at 59 on the Rockwell scale. The newer one came back at 55. That's not a rounding error. That's the difference between steel that holds an edge through a full day of hard use and steel that dulls before lunch. The grandfather's Mark II is closer to the first number. The grandson's knife off the shelf is closer to the second, and nothing on the box tells him that. The same forums are full of complaints about vertical and lateral play in newer folder locks, blades that don't come sharp out of the box, and steel grades listed only as vague, high-carbon stainless, with no actual specification given anywhere on the packaging. Nobody adjusted the marketing to match any of it. The box still says exactly what it always said. That's one knife, one collector, one measurement. Here's what happened at scale. In 2005, Gerber started getting reports that a product called the Gator Combo Axe, an axe with a 7-inch knife hidden in the hollow handle, was cutting people. The knife could work loose mid-swing while someone was chopping or hammering. Some of the injuries needed stitches, some needed surgery. Under federal law, a manufacturer has to report injuries like that to the Consumer Product Safety Commission right away, the moment there is reasonable evidence of a defect. Gerber did not report it, not for years. The product kept selling at Dick's Sporting Goods and Bass Pro Shops for $28 to $60, right through that gap. The CPSC eventually caught it independently, ordered a recall of about 103,000 units in March of 2011, and in January of 2015, the Department of Justice made Gerber pay a $2.6 million civil penalty for sitting on the reports for the better part of a decade. That axe, by the way, wasn't even made in China. It was made in Taiwan. Get the facts wrong on a story like this, and you lose the right to tell it. So here's where the story actually sits at this point. The steel got measurably softer. The company sat on injury reports for roughly 6 years before regulators forced the issue. And even after the recall, the fix wasn't a redesign. It was a free plastic cap mailed out to hold the knife in place. The label on the box never changed to reflect any of it. None of that, on its own, explains why some Gerbers still get built in Portland at all, while others don't. That answer is still coming, and it has nothing to do with pride and craftsmanship. This is the part that proves it wasn't ignorance. Fiskars knew exactly how to build a tool to a serious standard. They just didn't spend that standard on most of the Gerber name. Every Fiskars axe and hatchet sold under its own brand is still made at a factory in Vilnius, Finland, a facility with roots going back centuries in iron and steel work, and Fiskars markets that heritage proudly on those products. So this isn't a company that only knows how to build cheap. It's a company that decided Gerber's civilian catalog wasn't going to get the Vilnius treatment. That's not incompetence. That's a deliberate allocation of where the quality budget goes. And it went to Finland, not Oregon, for the products carrying the Gerber name that don't have a federal contract forcing the issue. There's a second version of this same trick worth knowing about, because it shows up across the entire outdoor and tactical industry, not just here. When a company calls a consumer product professional grade, the comparison being made is almost never against real commercial or military equipment. It is a comparison against other products in that same company's own consumer lineup, measured against its own cheapest model rather than against anything that actually ships to a contract customer. Gerber's language works the same way. Military grade on a paraframe isn't being measured against the StrongArm sitting 3 feet away in the same store. It is being measured against nothing at all. In 2009, Gerber leaned further into image over substance and launched the Bear Grylls branded survival line, his name and face on the packaging. It sold well. On Blade forums, longtime members said the partnership had not done Gerber any favors inside the knife community. A famous face on the box is not a spec. It is the same move as the words military grade, just wearing a different celebrity instead of a different acronym. You might already be thinking every gear company plays this game, so why does it matter which specific one you buy from? It matters because the industry-wide emptiness of the phrase is exactly what makes the individual company's actual behavior the only thing left worth checking. If the label can't be trusted anywhere, the only remaining signal is what the company actually did with the product underneath it. And in Gerber's case, that record includes a measured hardness drop, a 6-year gap between known injuries and a legally required report, and a $2.6 million penalty for the gap. That is not industry noise. That is one company's specific record, sitting behind a label that looks identical to every other box on the shelf. Now compare all of that to the people this marketing is actually built to impress. Special Forces operators, the guys the entire tactical industry is selling you a substitute for, mostly do not carry $200 tactical folders. They carry Leatherman multi-tools, K-bars, standard issue Emerson combat blades bought off a factory line, the same models any civilian can order online. The knife the SEAL point man carried on the raid that killed bin Laden was not some exotic custom piece built for the mission. It was a factory Emerson CQC7 handed to him personally by its designer years earlier, not a one-off prototype built for the job. Operators pick cheap and reliable over expensive and tactical almost every time. Because in the field there is no warranty department, there is no replacement part 2 states away, and a tool either works or it gets you killed. A knife with fewer moving parts is a knife with fewer ways to fail at 3 in the morning in the rain. Reliability under real conditions, not a label, is the actual spec that matters to the people the industry claims to be arming. Which brings us to the part of this story almost nobody outside a handful of Portland manufacturing workers actually knows. The reason the grandfather's Mark II and the grandson's shelf knife aren't the same knife was never really about pride or nostalgia or even quality control on its own. It's about who each one was legally built for. There's a federal law called the Berry Amendment. Congress passed the first version in 1941 to protect the domestic industrial base during wartime, and it's been tightened and made permanent since. It says the Department of Defense cannot buy certain categories of gear, including hand tools, unless they're grown, reprocessed, or manufactured entirely inside the United States. No percentage exception, no mostly American workaround the way some other federal purchasing rules allow. There's technically an escape hatch, something called a domestic non-availability determination, where a contracting officer can certify that no U.S. source can meet the need. It's granted rarely, it requires documented proof that domestic suppliers were actually asked and actually couldn't deliver, and it does not apply just because a foreign factory is cheaper. If the Pentagon is buying it and it falls under that law, it gets built here, full stop, or that narrow exception gets formally justified on paper first. That single law is the reason Gerber still runs a factory in Portland. The StrongArm fixed blade, a full tang knife issued to military and law enforcement, is made there. The LMF II infantry knife, designed specifically to help downed pilots cut through a jammed parachute harness, is made there. The MP600 multi-tool, standard issue for a lot of active units, is made there. These aren't heritage pieces kept around for nostalgia. They're the actual government contract, and the contract is why that factory hasn't closed the way so much of American knife manufacturing already has. Everything else Gerber sells doesn't fall under that law. The paraframe folder sitting in the checkout aisle at Walmart, the torch, most of the budget lines carrying the exact same military-grade language on the packaging as the contract knives 3 aisles over in a sporting goods store. None of that gear is going to a soldier. None of it has to meet the Berry Amendment standard. So Gerber builds it wherever production is cheapest, which for years now has meant contract factories in China, and prints the same trust-building words on the box that the actual military contract earned through a completely separate supply chain. Same brand name, 2 entirely different manufacturing operations. One of them is legally bound to a standard by federal law. The other is bound to nothing but a price point set by a big box retailer. To be fair to Gerber, and precise instead of dramatic about it, they haven't abandoned American manufacturing entirely. Roughly 139 of their products, close to a fifth of the current catalog, are still built in that Portland facility, running through an estimated 686,000 pounds of U.S. steel every year. That's real, and it's worth saying plainly instead of pretending the whole brand quietly vanished overseas. It's also a small, specific slice of everything carrying the Gerber name, and the company has never made it easy for a customer standing in an aisle to tell, at a glance, which slice they're actually holding. One Portland local posting on Blade forums, who said he knows people who've worked at both Gerber and Leatherman, put Leatherman's domestic production above 90%. That's one person's account, not an audit, but it tracks with what Leatherman built its whole identity around. One supply chain, one standard, instead of splitting the catalog in 2 under a single logo. Here's what all of this actually costs you, in dollars, not adjectives. A Gerber paraframe made overseas runs about $15 to $20 retail. A Gerber center drive multi-tool made in Portland runs closer to $130 to $150. An MP600, same Portland line, sits around $80. A StrongArm fixed blade lands between $80 and $100. Same logo stamped on every one of them. A 5 to 7 times price gap between the cheapest and the contract grade version. And the only way to know which one you're actually paying for is a small marking most buyers never think to check. So if you're standing in an aisle right now or scrolling a listing, here's how you actually tell the two Gerbers apart. Gerber marks its domestically produced items with a U.S. flag icon paired with an outline of the state of Oregon listed on the product page. If that mark isn't there, the knife in your hand is not the one built to the standard. The name on the handle is selling you. If you're buying online through a third-party seller instead of Gerber's own site, check the listing photos for that same mark stamped into the actual steel itself, not just printed on the box, since packaging gets reused across production runs and photos get recycled between listings too. If you specifically want the version of Gerber that still earns the label, 4 names to look for: the StrongArm fixed blade, the LMF II infantry, the MP600 multi-tool, the center drive multi-tool, the premium civilian option out of that same Portland lineup. All 4 are made in Oregon. All 4 are tied to the actual military contract. And all 4 will cost more than the version sitting on the shelf right next to them. If you're building a bug-out bag or a fixed piece of kit you're betting your safety on, that price gap is the cost of an actual standard. If you're just carrying something to open boxes and cut rope around the house, it isn't. If budget is the actual constraint and you just need a working folder under $30, don't reach for the cheap Gerber purely out of brand loyalty. Multiple long-running threads on blade forums, some stretching back close to 2 decades, describe budget knives from Schrade, Kershaw, and CRKT at the same price point, holding an edge longer and arriving sharper out of the box than the equivalent Gerber. Different factories, similar price, consistently better result. The country of manufacture was never actually the problem here. Gerber's specific choices about materials and quality control at that price tier were. And if a multi-tool is what you're actually shopping for rather than a fixed blade, the same forum consensus points toward Leatherman first, not out of brand worship, but because their track record on quality control simply holds up better at a comparable price, year after year, according to the same community that's been tracking Gerber's decline since the late 2000s. One more check before you buy anything in this category, from any brand, not just Gerber. Look at whether the listing actually names the steel. A serious manufacturer tells you the exact alloy, something like 420HC or S30V, because that number is verifiable and testable against a hardness reader the same way the easy out comparison was. A listing that only says high carbon stainless steel with nothing more specific is giving you marketing language dressed up as a spec. The same trick as military grade wearing a metallurgy costume. If a product page won't name its steel, treat that silence as an answer, not an oversight. And if you already own an old Gerber, something from the 70s or 80s with a Mark II or a vintage gator sitting in a drawer, that knife is not a lesser version of anything currently on the shelf. Based on the hardness numbers alone, it's very likely made from tougher steel than what's sitting in the case at most sporting goods stores today. Keep using it, sharpen it. It's doing its job better than most of what replaced it. So go back to that grandson from the start of this video. His new Gerber almost certainly doesn't carry the Oregon mark, and it never had the federal law protecting the steel the way his grandfather's Mark II did. Same name, same 3 words on the box. 2 knives built for 2 entirely different customers. Military grade isn't a lie Gerber invented. It's just the one word nobody was legally forced to keep honest. So check for the mark before you pay for the name.